Welcome back to another episode of Northern Exposure. I'm Rick Halpern. I'm based here in Toronto, Ontario, and I'm really pleased that my guest today, Nico Pizzolato, is able to join us from London in the United Kingdom. We're going to do something a little bit different for this session. We're going to be talking about photography, videography, documentation in a time of pandemic. And I'm going to turn it over to Nico in just a minute, and he'll say a little more, both about the photographer he selected, but also about the creative process that he's going to speak to. Nico?
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me. I'm very honored to talk to you about these topics.
Great. Do you want to say a little bit about the photographer you've chosen and why it speaks to us in this time of lockdown?
Yes. Maybe I'll say a little bit actually about how I came to videos and photography, because maybe it's a story that you don't know so much about. And I don't know whether you know that I did film school before, when I was quite young, just after my BA. I spent a whole year in Paris doing film school, and that's the moment in which I really got drawn into photography. At the time, I was also printing my photos as well as shooting, and so that was the formative time in which I started to develop my interest both in photos and videos, and then I came into contact with two very inspiring filmmakers. One is Raul Ruiz, Chilean director, who passed away maybe 10 years ago, who had a kind of surreal style, way of approaching story making, which I will say was not linear. Okay, let's say it like this. And another filmmaker who was really important for me was Abbas Kiarostami. He also passed away. And I was fortunate enough to attend workshops with them in my 20s. And Kiarostami was totally different in terms of the simplicity of his approach to story making, trying to to capture the stories of, in a kind of neorealistic way almost. So I think both kind of things stay with me over time. And even though I never kind of filmmaking or photography never became my main vocation, but I still go back from time to time in different ways. And I think what I will show later is one of the opportunities that I had lately to practice this passion of mine. So I wanted to show you some work from Luigi Ghirri, who is very well known in Italy as a photographer, maybe a bit less known abroad. If I'm not sure whether you were familiar with him, but it's starting to be also known worldwide. There have been kind of major retrospectives of his work done both in Western Europe and in North America. So Luigi Ghirri, his kind of more important work is in the 1970s, and he's the first major photographer who really works with color in Italy. Prior to that, all the artists, all the photographers who wanted to gain a reputation work with black and white. So it's the first one who really owns color as a kind of approach, and he only shoots in color. And the other thing is that he has a knack for bringing ordinary places to life in a way, in the sense that he elevates the ordinary, I think, of everyday life. He also owns the fact that he works in the province of Italy. He doesn't work in major metropolitan centers like Milan or Rome or Venice or any of these art cities, but he works in the province of Reggio Emilia, in the Modena province, and elsewhere in the region. And by province, I mean that these are places that were not usually the focal point of photography in Italy up to that point. If you want to think of similar aesthetics, you might think in the US of Ed Ruscha and William Eggleston, you know, in their photographs of shops, of streets in the US. But in relation to them, I think Ghirri has also his own aesthetics in how he maybe saturates color. And it came to my mind because obviously the options for artists working with images in times of pandemic have been more restricted. And I thought that one way was to do the kind of work that Ghirri has done, or another way was going to the woods, like I did in my own work. Maybe other options were closed in terms of subject. This is part of his kind of most famous photos in the 70s. Interesting, Ghirri, before becoming a professional photographer, he worked for about 10 years as a, I don't know how to say it, as a surveyor. Is surveying land for, you know, for commercial purposes. And he always claimed that he had a certain ways of looking at landscape because of that. I think once you see a few pictures, you can see that. And a lot of his photos are characterized by landscape, either empty or people with very few people. It's not someone who's about persons. It's a landscape photographer. Yeah, this photo is typical of him in terms of its simplicity, the composition, the emptiness of the space, but also the certain kind of saturation of a certain palette of colors, I would say. And yeah, so that's it's and also, you know, in relation of the idea of paying attention to the ordinary. And Ghirri is also, I think, you can say that he's of the school of kind of de-skilling photography. So he has this sort of de-skilled approach of not going for a highly technical effort, but more kind of capture a mood, I would say. Mm-hmm. I don't know, what does the photo say to you?
Well, I think it's a really neat photo. It's almost all about composition, since there's only the swing set or whatever that structure is in it. And I love the line of tide that runs perpendicular to the sea. And of course, the major divide between the horizon with the sky above and then the sand below. So it's certainly very evocative in terms of mood, but it's just a really just wonderful composition. And the colors are great too.
Yeah, and it's a sand which is almost untouched by kind of human footprint. And I don't know what is clear from this picture already, but all his work has often a sort of nostalgic mood, which kind of run through the work. But let me show you a couple of other things from him. So as I said, he sometimes has people in photos, but these people always seem either isolated or kind of distant from each other, and in a kind of mysterious relationship with the environment. And I can see that again here. I mean, obviously the Colosseum in Rome is one of the most famous photographed sightseeing venue, but you see it in a totally different light here from the angle, with this man in the center who's looking exactly, we don't know where and what, but probably not at the Colosseum itself. And again, the composition, I think, is quite striking with these bushes in the forefront.
Yeah, no, again, I would underscore the composition. It's almost a disjointed collection of objects, people, and flora. The color is fascinating as well. This obviously was shot with film, but it has a kind of a very classic, almost chrome type feeling. It's a wonderful image.
Yes, it's Kodachrome, and I will mention that most of these photos are actually just developed in a way. Commercial photos were developed by amateur photographers, by tourists, and they are kind of, most of them are the size of a postcard.
Right.
So again, these are very specific choices that he made throughout his career. This is another more kind of architectural one. Again, it strikes me for its amazing composition, symmetry. It just shows that the eye that Ghirri had for for certain type of combinations of lines and shapes and light.
Yeah, it's the most abstract of the ones that you've shared
so
with
far.
us, and I think it works exceedingly well. And what I particularly like is that the wall on the left is cracked. It's not perfect, is it?
Yeah.
And the mountain bisects the sky in an interesting angle as well. Very, very nice photo.
And I agree with you when you said abstract, because the more you look at Ghirri's work, the more you can find some similarities with more often with conceptual art rather than the kind of history of photography, I would say. So he drew a lot of inspiration from conceptual art as well. And my last photo for today is a photo which has people in it, but again, you can see that his eye is for distance and mystery, and people being isolated from each other. And yeah, that's why I think his work spoke to me so much during these times.
Yeah, I think again, this is a really interesting photo. There's so many stories you could imagine about what's going on in the scene. And I love the fact that Ghirri has this extended foreground, the red gravel or cement or whatever it is. And the fence is just, really nice as well. Thanks for sharing these. I mean, these do provide a little taste. And as I said earlier, we'll put a link or two, so that viewers who are interested in learning more about Luigi Ghirri can follow those links on their own. Let's shift gears now and talk about your current work and a project that's occupied you for the last few months while we've been on COVID lockdown. You've moved from still photography to videography, and I know you've thought very hard about the creative process in a self-conscious way. And maybe you could start off by telling us about how the idea of the project came to you, how you started with some still photos that were studies, but then how you moved past that into videography.
Yes. I live in London, really at the outskirts of London, near a big forest, which is also historically important. It's called Epping Forest. And it's a forest where I go jogging, where I go walking, where I go to think and meditate and relax. And obviously, with the lockdown starting, it's been really an essential part of the day to have the chance to go into the forest. And I also thought that I would want to use the lockdown for some creative project. And I mean, looking back at Ghirri, of course, one way would have been to capture urban life during the lockdown. But the other possible thing to do with lockdown was actually to go into the woods and try to capture what was my experience of the forest. So that's what eventually I tried to do. But as I said, my interest in photographing the forest and or making it the subject of videos has been there for a long time. But I also run into some difficulties in how to visualize the forest. I think the challenge was what kind of aesthetics of the photo I wanted to go for. And so I started to approach that with kind of some study photos, because when you start actually to approach a forest, you find that it's very messy. It's a very messy place to capture. So it took me some time to understand some kind of basic guidelines that I want to follow in approaching visually the forest. So I guess I could say in this respect, so that I've always felt there was a gap between the way I felt the forest when I would just kind of go through it and feel kind of the beauty and the beauty of the forest at the personal level. But then at the moment in which I would have a device in my hand to capture that beauty, it wouldn't translate. So I was trying to find a way to make that, to bridge that gap between. As I was studying the forest, I tried to understand whether I want to go for black and white or color, and what I would gain and lose in one way or another. And so I started first of all to think about composition, and I came to realize that I could use the trees in a way to create either a frame or a foreground for the shot. And so I started to look for those kind of situation within the forest. And so you can see this here, in which it is sort of a kind of reverse L shape.
Yes.
But it's also a very impressive tree in itself. But that's not enough, I will say, because there are many impressive trees in this forest. But when you try to capture them, your device is too small to get that. So I try to work in terms of frames, framing the forest with the help of trees. One other fascinating aspect, again difficult to capture, was how the light, how the sun went through the leaves.
Yep.
So I made a few studies about that. Try to what was the best way to capture that ray of light into the kind of thicket of the leaves. Designing a shape within the frame. Otherwise, the forest might appear kind of shapeless if one just goes and photographs it without any pre-notion of what the frame would look like. Another aspect is the sky, as it can be seen through the forest. And again, I thought that that's another interesting aspect that one could really capture through these kind of holes in the in the forest. So what I guess what I want to say is that eventually you have to choose on a limited amount of spots in the forest that can convey your feeling, because in many other parts you feel that beauty but you can't capture it.
So when you say a limited number of spots that emerged from the study, are we talking about 4 or 5, 10, 20?
Well, no, it will be more than that.
Okay.
I mean, this forest in particular is 20 miles long.
Right.
It's pretty big for kind of English standards, and not by North American standards. So there are many spots that you can find out, but at the same time it requires some legwork. So I went many times with a bike and just walking in the early mornings where there was certain light to scout for locations. which contrasts with the feeling that on an ordinary day you just walk into a forest and just, oh, so beautiful. That's another kind of situation that I was kind of looking for, the light coming into the woods and creating a specific
Yep.
distinct spot within. So the light designing a shape within the forest. I guess that's what I want to say.
How many of these study shots do you think you took?
About 30 or 40.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Then another, I think, aspect which didn't really made into the film eventually, but it's the way the forest has been shaped by human intervention, which create this kind of situation in which woods is shaped by man rather than by itself. And another possible line of inquiry that doesn't fully make into the video, only partially, is the boundaries between the forest and the city.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and this is like a study photo from kind of that sort of angle, and I think one could make a whole project just on that, I guess, the boundaries and how that transition looks like.
Thanks for sharing those photos that formed the initial study for the video. Can you tell us a little bit about the next steps in the process?
Yes. So in the past couple of years, I became interested in a format of videography, which is called video essay. And that's originally something that has kind of been used for sort of film criticism. So video essays usually features extracts from films, and there's maybe some commentary on it, or they are manipulated in a certain way. But increasingly, video essays now work in a more kind of experimental way with both kind of found footage and other type of shots. So I found that kind of quite inspiring, also in terms of what could be achievable within a kind of a lockdown setting, which you're basically on your own with your camera and with your kind of editing suite. That was a little bit in terms of format that was ideal for me. And the other thing, an author that came to my mind when I approached this project was a Lebanese artist called Basim Magdi. Basim, Basim, Magdi, Magdy. He works with 60 millimeters film, which he manipulates in a certain way. But what really struck me as kind of interesting about this work was how he approached the narration. I approached the narration with subtitles, but without voiceover. And that's something that I have to say I took on board in my own video. And it was very, I felt a sense of freedom when I saw that for the first time, that you could do that. You didn't need to put your voice over to tell a story. And I could see that it worked in his work. So I felt very, very inspired by that. He also has a sort of surreal strike in his work that that also kind of drove from, but not completely. I would say he was also quite an influence in shaping the videos that I'm currently doing. I have another one in preparation.
And again, what we can do is we'll insert a link.
Sure.
We will insert a link in the comments section so that viewers can learn more about Basim Magdi.
Yes, I think that's what I want to. So as a result, in this video is composed of shots of the forest, which basically the outcome of that methodology that I talked about, as well as so-called found footage, which is footage that I found on YouTube that kind of spoke to the story I want to tell, basically.
Where can you get hundreds of price cuts that help keep the cost of living in check? Check out a Tesco. Check out a 15 3/4 ounce can of Heinz baked beans, 12.5p. A pound of Stork SB margarine, 26.5p. 3 pounds of McDougall's flour, 24.5p. 150-gram carton of Ski yogurt, 7.5p. A 200-gram pack of Jacob's cream crackers, 11.5p. 11.5p. A large can of ideal evaporated 15.5p. 15.5p. A pound jars of chippers, 19.5p. 19.5p. A litre bottle of Tesco, low calorie, 14.5p. 14.5p. A half pound of Tesco, a half pound of Tesco, 19.5p. 19.5p.
From early morning till noon. Some of the mums were already smelling of gin and my dearing everybody as they waddled out of the station yard, followed by their barns like proudly clucking hens with their chickens fluttering along behind them. The men of those days tended to be as stunted as the lopped hornbeams in the forest itself. Few of the girls were beautiful.
Nico, one thing that struck me watching that segment from the video is the captioning. You said earlier on that you felt liberated when you realized that you could avoid voiceover narration and instead use captioning. But you did choose to caption both in Italian and in English. And for a viewer like me, that presents a really interesting dimension to viewing and processing the video, because I'm looking at the English, looking at the Italian, and then starting to think, where does Nico's meaning lie? Is it with the Italian? Is it with the English? Or is it somewhere in between? So could you talk a little bit about your decision to use two languages?
Yes, well, the decision itself is practical because I'm an Italian based in London, and my audience is made of speakers of both languages. And I guess there aren't so many viewers like you who would be able to kind of capture what's kind of lost in translation. But at the same time, what also complicates even more the matter is that sometimes I think in English and sometimes I think in Italian, or sometimes I write in English and sometimes in Italian. So the translation process kind of goes both ways, and there's room for I wouldn't say mistakes, but it's also likely for different interpretations of my thoughts in the different languages.
As you know, and I think most of the viewers know, Northern Exposure was born out of a sense of frustration with COVID lockdown. I know many of us like to get out well beyond the house once or twice a week with a camera and shoot. And that became very, very difficult, certainly in the first few months of lockdown. You seem to have addressed that question of creative frustration in a really interesting way by sort of embracing the restricted stage of just the home, just the immediate family members.
Yes. So what I try to do is that really to understand what was within these small, rather restricted boundaries in which I could move myself as an artistic person, and try to get as much as possible out of that. So first video that I shot was within the home and the routines of the home during lockdown. For the second one, I decided to explore the forest next to me, which was so much part of my kind of lockdown everyday routine as well, because I was going there to, for the moment of, being open air, being outdoor. And another way in which, for instance, I'm looking at it is to work with found footage to create, that's another project that I've currently in mind, to create a sort of visual representation of my journals, because I'm journaling every day through found footage. So yeah, I guess that in terms of video making, the idea that I was allowed to use found footage as well as my own production liberated me in the sense that I could go beyond to what I couldn't shoot right now to use what's out there. So I felt sort of entitled to borrow without any regret. and I think I kind of subscribe to that. Like I'm happy about that.
That's really fabulous. Thanks for sharing that.